Hello and welcome back to my channel, Mend with Mare. All right, so we are back and we are back today to talk about being a loved one of an addict, which is a very, very hard thing to be. I actually wrote a book about this, and this is where some of you are communicating with me about this on the book's Instagram. The name of the book is Hey Addiction, Thanks for Nothing. It's funny. It's basically a how-to guide, like how to love an addict without losing your mind. In this book, I go into a lot of my own personal stories, but it's also self-help. And if you're interested in it, please check out my Instagram. You'll see some of my artwork from the book. Please check it out. The link is below. I haven't gotten an agent or publisher yet for the book.
I've gotten a few rejections.
But I am determined to get this book out because I believe that this is a very underserved but humongous population that needs to have a book that they can laugh at and also to feel seen and not feel alone and have practical questions and activities that they can go through to not feel like they're suffering in the shadows of addiction's harm. And if you want to get on the pre-order list, please go to my Instagram or shoot me an email. Okay. So let's put that aside. My bitterness will be put to the side that it has gotten rejected. Through my Instagram, I've gotten a lot of questions and a lot of people asking, how do I help an addict? What do I do? Well, if you're so close to them, you love them so much, you're probably going to get over involved and you're not going to like what I'm gonna tell you. So instead of telling you what you should do, I'm gonna tell you what you don't do. Okay? I want you to remember that each of us are in a different stage when it comes to loving an addict. Some of you may be seeing this and you think you can help them. And some of you may be at the very end where you have given it up and you're like, peace out. You gotta do you. I can't save you. See you again when you're good.
Okay.
My very first don't is don't judge until you've been in DAG. DAG is a name that I came up with, and it stands for Daily Analyzing Group. This is what I dealt with in my household when I was growing up. See, my sister had a serious addiction when I was like 16, and it was as if my mom, dad, and I would get together and we would analyze everything. This didn't happen just once a day, it would happen several times a day. Our attention on her addiction was obsessive. We wanted to save her. We were scared of the worst happening. We were afraid of losing her. Deathly afraid, as many of you probably are. But DAG, Daily Analyzing Group, was like a constant game of chess. We'd go over what could happen and how do we stop it? How do we intervene? How might my sister react? How would we then react to her reaction? And so on. The DAG went from tolerable to painful. Sometimes when the analyzing cycle began, there was like this irritation that would start rising up in me. My heart would start pounding, and it, like the pressure in my ears would become so intense that I seriously felt like my eardrums were going to explode and like shoot blood all over the room. I know that that's like really messed up to say, but that's truly the obsessive nature around anticipating and planning and being like, well, if they take that, then I'll do this. If they do that. When I think back on that time, I get frustrated with myself. I'm like, why didn't I just walk out of the room and say, it's not my problem? But the thing is that I didn't know better. I thought that it was. It wasn't an option to walk out of the room. It wasn't, because it's family. And when you're family, you do everything for the other person to like your own detriment. That's how I was raised. It's not the way it is right now, but that's how I was raised. If I walked out of the room and didn't engage in this daily analyzing group, I thought that I would be disappointing my mom or betraying my family, or worse, having to make, my mom and dad deal with it on her own. If you notice that you're in this spiral, don't continue engaging in it. It is for professionals to take over because, quite frankly, an addict has to be ready to accept help. And until then, nothing that you do truly will matter. And I'm going to admit something that a lot of us don't share. I remember a sunny day in the Walmart parking lot when we finally decided that we couldn't handle it anymore and we were involving outside people, which was my aunt and my cousins. And I had, muttered under my breath, just like, it would just be so much easier if she wasn't here anymore. And I remember the horror on my family's face, like looking at me like, how could you say something like that? And I was just like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I just was so exhausted by the analyzing of my sister's addiction. And I have found that so many of my clients have confided in me and they will share with deep shame that they have thought the same, that the thought has gone through their head, that this would all go away, that all of this misery will end if they just weren't here causing all this havoc. And many of my clients have been surprised to hear me say, no, I've thought that too. The goal in disclosing this thought is to normalize this reaction and to help them to understand that it's not unusual for the brain to go in this direction. The brain is protecting you by letting you fantasize about the different ways that you could escape this. So just as much as you're figuring out a plan to help the addict, your mind also is like trying to think of a way that they can stop being a part of this chaos. But this thought, I will say, is a marker. So if you have this thought, if you've ever had this fantasy, and I know you don't actually want them to die, that's not what I'm saying at all. We know that that's not true. But if you've ever had this thought, know that it's a marker. It's just letting you know that you are too involved, that you're doing too much, and it's now time to surrender, and you got to now pay attention to yourself. It is signaling to pay attention to the underlying mental anguish that is driving these thoughts. So be gentle with yourself. Okay, so the next don't is don't be a bitter bitch. I know, it sounds ridiculous. There was a time when I was sitting outside of a Trader Joe's and I was trying to motivate myself to run errands. But I remember I just burst into tears and I just sat in the car crying. And I was like, when are these antidepressants going to kick in? Why am I crying? What is happening? There were moments of intense rage that really had me developing a deep understanding for arsonists. Like, I got why people might set something on fire. But I remember I got myself out of the car, popped on some sunglasses to cover up my puffy eyes, and I remember strolling through the aisle and I saw two, I think they were the employees, laughing and smiling. And I remember muttering under my breath like,
oh, isn't your life so perfect?
And I didn't realize that I actually had muttered that loud enough to where they could hear me. And I remember them like looking back like, what? You know, like who is this person? And I just remember thinking like, oh no, who have I become? Because I had never used to be so mean and hateful. And then I was thinking to myself like, okay, wait, things were easier before. When was the time when things were easier and I didn't feel this way? And I had to think back, like, was it last year? What was different? And then it just hit me like a train. It just was like,
oh no.
It's when they started drinking. Oh no. That was the realization right then. Something had shifted after that time period when I knew the drinking was a problem. But I still thought I was probably in like stage 2. See, addiction doesn't just happen to them. It does you dirty. And you know it's there, but it's easier to look away. And either way, it's hell until you wake up, and waking up is not easy. And sometimes it takes somebody giving you a look like, what is your problem? That you are like, it's changed me. I had a lot of nicknames for myself at the time. Bitter bitch was a big one. I even started cross stitching for stress reduction. The cross stitch pattern that I chose to do was a quote, and it said, fold your worries into paper planes and turn them into flying Fs. My son was an early reader, and while this piece of art gave me a lot of joy, I am ashamed to say that I was responsible for his first curse word. This meant I needed to own up to my part of it. I needed to own up to my ugliness. How do we survive it? Acceptance, forgiveness, and hard work. And you might even get new definitions for those words. For example, there's this awesome writer, Ashley C. Ford, and she defined her definition of forgiveness as letting go of the idea of what was supposed to be. So forgiveness is letting go of the idea of how it's supposed to be. Oftentimes we get so sad and upset and bitter because things aren't turning out the way that we had once imagined it for ourselves and our loved one and our family. And addiction, we can point out, is at the crux of it all. And we hate it because of that. We can't allow it to make us ugly and bitter. There's no peace in that. So my next don't is, don't let the addict make you an addict. I will speak from experience. So we're going to talk about self-medicating. You got to be very careful, because when you are in the survival mode of watching your loved one get destroyed by addiction, you will do things to numb the pain and to escape. The escape is very tempting because it relieves you from your current reality, but you have to keep an eye on it. If you don't get what I'm meaning, Let me give you a quick example. So, during the height of my loved one's addiction, I would engage in what I would call sleep shopping. So I would just like pop something, a little sleep aid, and I'd begin browsing. I would engage in mindless scrolling on Instagram where I was met with ads that somehow knew exactly what I liked and what I thought I needed. I felt like the masters of the internet cared about me and gave me the direction to peace through these material items. I was going through hell and I thought, I deserve a little pick me up, right? Wrong. I would wake up to several boxes on my doorstep and it would feel like Christmas. And I'd get a little like giddy, like a kid, because I genuinely didn't know what were in those boxes. Like I couldn't remember, and I would rip them open with delight and find these things. One time I ordered toeless yoga socks. They were like the ugliest socks I've ever seen. And then salt and pepper shakers from Anthropology. It turned out that I started spending more time packing up these items and returning them to the post office. And I was like, whoa, what's happening here? Do I have an addiction now? I think I might have an addiction now. And this was just another escape for me from my reality. I was buying myself things that I thought was going to give me joy, that I thought was going to distract me and make me feel good again, because I wasn't naturally feeling good anymore. So please don't become addicted in order to ignore their addiction. And then my last one is don't get mad. Get everyone. Get support. Don't do this alone. There's Al-Anon and Nar-Anon. They're awesome. I was so lucky that a friend of mine who was going through the very same thing that I was going through shared with me all of her spreadsheets that she had for all of the Zoom meetings for Al-Anon on West Coast, East Coast, so that, when we were getting ready for bed and there's still meetings going on the West Coast, I could just like pop it in my ear and listen to it and not feel alone. Talk to friends and family, make sure you're not enabling. And not the people who don't understand it. Okay. Get into therapy and get into things that make you feel really good. I even created a little slip of paper, a permission slip like you would get in school for myself. And it said, I, Meredith Beardmore, give myself permission to recognize that loving an addict is hard. I did not ask for this. I may have thoughts or feelings that are unwanted, but it's just my body's way of protecting me. This is hard. And then when I was in another mood where I wanted something a little bit more sassy, I think, or assertive, I had one that said, I, Meredith Beardmore, give myself permission to recognize that loving an addict is effing hard. I did not ask for this. Unwanted thoughts or feelings may come up, but it's just my body's way of protecting me because this is so effing hard. So some questions I want you to ask yourself are, have you ever fantasized about the ways in which your situation could change? Have you ever had thoughts that you were ashamed to admit? How do you feel learning that your brain is just trying to protect you? And when you realize that you're different because of various internal changes such as sadness, hopelessness, anxiety, hypersensitivity, denial, anger, there will be a moment or a gradual recognition that finally clicks in your brain that you may have been distracted from the culprit of your change, and it's your loved one's addiction. So take a moment and think back to when that happened. Let your mind go. Relax yourself and think about it. And think about what emotions come up for you when you reflect on that moment, when you realized that their addiction was impacting how you were feeling about yourself and about your life. And then I want you to really think about forgiveness toward yourself and what comes up for you when you think about that. And remember, forgiveness can be forgiving yourself for how you wanted it to be, how you imagined it would be, how you've handled things. Nobody can hold your hand through all of this, and it's really hard. So you have to forgive yourself for some of the mistakes that you've made along the way. For instance, acceptance. My definitions were that I will recognize the truth in my life, and I will come to terms with the fact that I have no control over another person, and that I will release judgment and how things should be instead of how they really are. Those are my different definitions for acceptance. So forgiveness was defined as an action to release the weight of resentment toward the addict. And it was freeing myself by no longer harboring negative feelings, even though those negative feelings were warranted, and acknowledging that things do not have to be the way that I envisioned. So think about, what are your definitions for that? Think about how you might be numbing yourself, distracting yourself, escaping, or self-medicating. Think about the trigger when you start to do that. Reflect on if this is truly in reaction to the addict's behavior. Think about, is the reaction helpful or harmful to you? My great friend Kate always will say to me, like, how does this serve you? How you want to react, how does it serve you? And that will kind of like center me a little bit. So when you want to self-medicate, you need to distract. You need to do other things for yourself. That can be planting flowers, screaming at the sky, breaking cardboard boxes, taking an exercise class, writing down all of your feelings and then lighting them on fire.
Explode.
Listening to music, calling a friend, attending a meeting. Okay, I hope that these don'ts were helpful to you. And again, I am putting myself out there with that vulnerability and being real about my own experiences, because that's what we have to keep doing, you know? Because we're all not alone. We're not alone. Please let me know what you think of this. If there's any more questions that you have, send me an email, drop me a comment, go follow Hey Addiction, Thanks for Nothing. All right, you all be well, treat yourself well, and have a good day. Bye-bye.